千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Eric Lin, where we delve deeply into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. So these are the 4 lines that I was talking about. As you can see, quite short. This is the shortest chapter in the entire Tao Te Ching. So previously, we had identified that it's a very simple task to split apart the 4 lines into 2 parts, 2 sections with 2 lines each. And we were able to get to the last line. Every single line in chapter 40 merits a pretty extensive and in-depth discussion, which we did. And we got to the last line, being is born of non-being. So I would like to give everyone a quick recap, just a few slides, to catch everyone up on what we are and what we talked about. Last time, we spoke of the overall reason for cultivating the Tao, to study the Tao, to apply lessons of the Tao into our lives. Why do we do that? Well, as you can see in this slide, the study of the Tao is all about mastering change. This could be seen from the first book on the Tao, which is the I Ching. That's the Book of Changes, or what I call the Change Classic. So we study the changes. Why? So that we know how to handle things, how to handle the transitions when things get better, when things are good. We know, as we learned in 39, that we have to be more humble. The better things get, the more humble we must be. We must guard against complacency because that is how success can collapse. So on the flip side of the coin, when things are bad, studying the Tao tells us that everything is transient. Nothing really lasts. The only universal constant is change. So things keep on changing. The pendulum keeps on swinging. That's our terminology from before. So we know that bad things are temporary. They don't last forever. Chapter 23 in the Tao Te Ching talks about how strong winds don't last all morning, sudden rains don't last all day. That's just the ancient expression to say that it comes and goes. It's not going to be forever. So because of that, we have reasons to hold on to hope. We have reasons to remain spiritually strong so that we can prepare for the inevitable change when things get better again. And so, again, using the metaphor of the pendulum, it's going to swing in the other direction and go from bad to better. So we're ready for that transition to occur. So that is the reason why we cultivate the Tao. It's relevant to this chapter because it talks all about circular movements, which is the cycles of change. So you guys saw this graphic before depicting the various levels of change, the levels where change can manifest and occur. And the sequence is heaven, earth, myriad things, and human beings, with the matching Mandarin characters to the left. And I've picked symbols to the right to depict each one. The arrows between different levels are meant to depict that every level follows and reflects the other levels, which is referenced in Tao Te Ching 25, where it talks about humans follow the laws of the earth, earth follows the laws of heaven, heaven follows the laws of Tao, and Tao follows the laws of nature. And because of that, we know that we can study human interactions to understand the greater Tao. Or we can read about the principles underlying the universal Tao itself and then apply that to life at the level of personal interactions. So we talked about this before, and then from change, circular movements, cycles of change, we got to the last couple of lines. In the last section, we spoke of how the myriad things of the world, that's all the living things, they all came from somewhere. We all come from some source. As I mentioned last time, physically, the source is our biological parents. And I mean that the physical body comes from biological parents through reproduction. Mentally, we are the sum of our life experience, everything we have seen and felt and learned. So there is a source for everything. Now, when we talk about physically and mentally, where we come from, we should also talk about spiritually. Where do we come from spiritually? Well, to answer that question, one way to do it is that we push back on the physical and mental origins to see how far back we can go. And the question that I present in this slide from last time was, so physically, your physical being, what if you trace back to a time before the existence of the earth? The example that we used before was about trees coming from a parent tree, and then that tree in turn comes from its parents before that. And we can trace this all the way back to a time before the earth existed. Where was the parent tree in that scenario? And for that matter, where was your remote ancestor? So we can see in those scenarios that the source of the remote ancestor, whether it's human beings or trees or any other living thing, it used to be just nothing more than pure potentiality waiting for manifestation. Just the potential waiting to actualize into reality. That potential is not something that you can see or feel. It doesn't have weight, it doesn't have substance. It's a manifestation of nothingness. It does not exist. So that's where reasoning takes us. This is what we got to last time. Now, let's push on a little further. So the caption that you see here, 有生于无, that's the last line. It basically says being is born of non-being, or if you prefer, existence is born of non-existence. I have the yin and yang symbol for the Tao. I have the Bagua, and this calls back to chapter 42, where it talks about how the emptiness, the empty void of the Tao, from there comes something, a oneness. And then from the oneness, it is differentiated and polarized into the two. That's the yin and yang. And then from there on, it is enumerated. There's a factor of movement, of interaction, the third factor, and through the interactions, many more are created, produced, given rise, and that is the Bagua, and the myriad things, the world. So that's the reason why I have those symbols up there. So now I want to talk about the uninformed opinion, the opinion that we come across often as a sort of an everyday kind of thing. So I want to use quote unquote Joe Sixpack to represent that opinion. If you prefer, it could be just, Joe Public. But the uninformed opinion, based on our common sense in what we see all around us, that opinion is something cannot come from nothing. It just can't. There is no such thing as a free lunch. So before we go further probing into that statement, I think we can all recognize that in the regular world, in the world in which we live at a personal scale, this is quite true. At our world, at the macroscopic scale, at the personal scale, something cannot come from nothing, or that's how it seems. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Yeah, I've certainly never been given a free lunch. There's a price associated with everything. But then when you look deeper, you see all kinds of interesting problems with this statement. Problems that I know a long time ago, I never questioned myself when I came across this for the first time. So let's talk about the Tao. What would the Tao say about such a statement? Something cannot come from nothing. No such thing as free lunch. Well, the ancient sages, just by observing the reproduction of living things and utilizing the tool of reasoning, they could see that existence comes from non-existence. As I mentioned, you can trace a living thing from its parents and then trace the parents back to the grandparents, the great-grandparents, and so on. But there comes a point where you've gone past the origin of life. Then, beyond that point, there's nothing. So that is the source, the nothingness from before that, before the origin of life, is actually the source of life. But at that point, it was nothing but potential and possibilities. Now, we don't need to just look at living things. We can also look around at all the things that we use, the objects. So where do they come from? All the tools, all the inventions that we have, everything that we utilize was once invented by someone. Before it was invented, it existed only in the imagination, that someone had to envision a particular tool before inventing it. There was a time when in the world, no cups existed, no mugs, no container meant for human consumption of liquids. There was a time when that did not exist. At some point, it began to exist, but before that, nothing. So just by thinking through that process, we also come to the same conclusion that existence comes from non-existence, or being comes from non-being. And in a very interesting way, science is actually corresponding, science is actually agreeing with what the ancients thought. So interesting contrast between the ancient sages and modern scientists. Of course, the ancient people did not have powerful tools of sophisticated scientific disciplines. We have that today. We've got computers, we've got laboratories, we have particle accelerators, we have powerful telescopes, we have all kinds of stuff that allow us to probe into reality, probe into nature at the deepest level. And what we learn is surprisingly corresponding to what the ancients had said. This is because ancient sages although lacking the telescopes and the particle accelerators and computers and whatnot, they had rationality and reasoning. Rationality and reasoning are a powerful tool all by itself. And in Mandarin, there's a character for that. This character is pronounced Li. It means rationality and reasoning. It means the human ability to look at the world and deriving useful conclusions or sensing the underlying principles that can be applied universally. So in a way, Li is very scientific in its foundational thinking. This is what the ancients had. Without the sophisticated equipment that we have, they nevertheless were able to reach a whole bunch of conclusions. So let's take a look at what the scientists of today are saying about the nature of existence. Actual science, actual scientist. Here's Dr. Don Lincoln at Fermilab. He said, he wrote, at the quantum level, matter and antimatter particles are constantly popping into existence and popping back out. We can't detect this with our normal senses at our everyday level. But at the quantum level, this is the reality. And the quantum level exists absolutely everywhere. So this is happening all the time. We just don't have senses that are fine enough to be able to detect the constant disappearing and appearing of these particles that are occurring all the time. And here's Dr. Lincoln giving his TED Talk. Now, I know that most people probably outside of physics and the sciences have not heard of Dr. Don Lincoln, although I think people familiar with the sciences certainly know about Fermilab. But a popular figure in science is Dr. Stephen Hawking. So he wrote a book called The Brief History of Time. In that book, he expressed the universe is the ultimate free lunch. So that's kind of a shocking statement, because this common sense statement that we had before from Joe Sixpack, that there's no such thing as a free lunch, Dr. Hawking is saying that not only is there such a thing as free lunch, the universe itself, which means everything that we can see, everything that we can detect, the entire universe is a free lunch. Now, what he meant by this was that the universe, the mathematics and theories show that the entire universe could have been the result, just like at the quantum level, the spontaneous existence of particles, the entire universe could have been the result of that, something that just came into existence. All this, all the complexity we see in the world, coming from nothing. So the more we learn about the world through science, the more we find the Tao to be correct. As physics, astrophysics, astronomy continue to advance, I have every confidence that we will only get more supporting evidence about the correctness of the Tao. And here's Dr. Hawking. May he rest in peace. So we talked about the level of heaven. Below at the different levels, we also want to talk about the level of the earth. So here I want to bring up a question. How old is the earth? The universe is some 14 billion years old. How about the earth? Well, 4.5 billion years. So there is about 10 billion years before the earth existed, where the universe existed, but not the earth. So prior to that, so prior to 4.5 billion years ago, the Earth did not exist as we know it today. That's simple to figure out. So then the question, how was the Earth formed? Well, the answer is, and the graphic on the right is a way to depict that initially it was the Earth formed along with the rest of the solar system, and it's a process that took billions of years, and it's mostly the work of gravitation. That initially it was nothing more than dust particles gathering together. And when enough of these dust particles got together, attracting one another with mutual gravity, they formed a spinning disk, and eventually they separated into rings, as you see in the graphic, and the rings eventually coalesce into planets. So unimaginably long time, but that is the process that took place. So the idea is that once again, we have, even with the Earth, something so big and vast on which we live, even in this scenario, something, the Earth, came from nothing. So then the next level is the myriad things, all the living things. So here, from this point on, it becomes quite simple because we know that there was a time when the Earth did not exist. So each level follows and reflects the previous one, as we talked about before. And that means we can then reasonably conclude, as Tao Te Ching chapter 25 says, life on Earth cannot exist when the Earth itself did not exist. There was nothing for earthbound life to exist on. That just makes sense. So what about human beings? Well, human beings are the same way because we are part of the myriad things. We are part of the living things on the face of this planet. So whatever is true apply to the living things of this planet, apply to us as well. So here I'm using the symbol that we used before. I used the symbol of the 1,000-hand guanyin to represent Buddhism, and then I used another sort of the opposite direction, hands coming together, joining together to symbolize the Tao. That all of us are coming together as one in the Tao. So what about us? With human beings, we certainly know from science, from the fossil records, that the human species evolved over millions of years. So the familiar graphic that I think we have all seen is this one here. It's depicting humanoid evolution from millions of years ago to early primates, early humans, to modern humans. So the same question that we're asking in this chapter applies in equal strength. What happened when the Earth did not exist? Humanity also could not exist when the Earth itself did not exist. So there's a big question mark there. The only conclusion, the only possible conclusion is that along with the rest of all the living things on this planet, we too existed as pure potentiality that was just waiting for the right time to manifest in physical reality. And I will represent that using the Tao. So there we are. This is actually a depiction of reality. This is a reality in which we live. So no matter which way we look, whether it's heaven or earth, myriad things, or human beings, our conclusion has to be, as per the title, 有生于无, being is born of non-being. This graphic over here represents being or existence. To the left of it, non-being, non-existence. Only the Tao in the abstract. So now, finally, we're ready to do the paraphrase for Tao Te Ching, chapter 40. This last concept, 有生于无, this was the last concept that I wanted to cover. And now we have. So onward to the paraphrase. Our purpose, once again, is to demonstrate that we understand the meaning completely in chapter 40, and therefore we're able to express that meaning with our own words. So here we are, the 4 lines. This should be easier because there are only 4 lines. The first 2 lines, we'll do them together, talks about the returning as a movement of the Tao. So remember, from our discussion before, the returning is depicting this great circular movement, going there, coming back. Applied to you and me, it means going into existence, coming back into non-existence, and then going again to existence. Number 2, the weak is the utilization of the Tao. Per our previous discussion, this is specifically about life. The weak is that which is pliant, that which is soft, that which is full of life. So together, we've got the circle and life. Here's the paraphrase that I would offer. The movements of the Tao found everywhere in nature can be characterized as a circular motion that returns to its point of origin. The function of the Tao, also found everywhere in nature, can be characterized as the softness and pliancy of life. So there we cover both the circle and life itself. Then we move on to the bottom, the second half. The myriad things of the world are born of being. Being is born of non-being. So that's the concept we just covered. And here's the paraphrase. All the living things in the world come from the previous generation. We trace this idea back in time and soon realize that everything that exists ultimately comes from non-existence. This is the wonder of the Tao, the empty source of creation. So that is the paraphrase. Now, the very last thing that we should do is the full circle. And I started doing this and found that it was pretty helpful, because when you understand the Tao completely, when you understand a particular chapter completely, then what you are able to do is that you can see where the end of the chapter connects to the beginning. So in this case, we want to do the same thing. How do we connect the end of this chapter back to its beginning to really get the full essence of the Tao? Let's give that a try. This chapter is short, so it is easy for us to see the connection. The very last line is about being coming from non-being or nothingness. That's the last line. Now, I want to just point to that and remind everybody that this applies to all of us. We are living beings. We come from the state of non-being or non-existence. This applies to you and me. So prior to you and I being born, we have no recollection of what happened before. We were in a state of non-existence. Now, the words can be a little tricky. This doesn't necessarily mean that we had no existence whatsoever, that it was oblivion, and that's what we're returning to. as you can see, we go back, we link the last line to the first line. The first line is talking about the great circle. It's basically saying that everything in existence is a great circle. Again, this applies to all of us. When we put the two of them together, the message from Lao Tzu becomes quite clear. Lao Tzu is basically saying from the last line to the first line, we all cycle through this thing called life. And let me use a graphic here of the yin and yang symbol. And when we cycle through this thing called life, we think, or some think, some fear that death is the end. But if death was the end of this thing called life, then there's no cycling through it. There's just a broken line. Therefore, physical death is not the end. You don't get off that easily. Sorry, you have to cycle through again. Indeed, we go from being to non-being. I like non-being as a better term than non-existence, because as a spiritual entity, you are a non-being, as in non-material being. You have to come back into being, you have to take on physical form, manifest again, experience again, learn again, and then lifetime is up, go back into non-being. We're cycling through. This being the case, it continues on indefinitely. Every time we come through, just like right now, you and I interact, connect, spend time together. That's the key. We're here for one another. We're not here strictly for ourselves, because all of us are connected as one. So the destiny that we have, the overall group destiny that all of us have as part of this group, this overall group of Tao meeting on Sundays, yeah, this is part of our existence. This is part of life. This is where we should be. This is where we are. This is where we will always be, together in one form or another. We're going to cycle through. We're going to come back. And again, we will be interacting and connecting just like before. That is why I say throughout eternity. So that is the ultimate message. From 40, you get that message very clearly when you connect the last line with the first line. This concludes our discussion of chapter 40. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.